Hey, Dr.
Greeting.
Mamyrah Prosper, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh,
Good
good.
morning.
Good
Good morning.
morning.
Good morning. So let's jump right into it because I know sometimes
Yes.
the internet is not always stable. A lot is going on. I know you're involved in a lot. So as news is broken that the president has been assassinated in Haiti,
Mm-hmm.
the little that we know is that whatever happened, his wife was also shot. We also know that there is some Spanish language happening in the background, which is leading people to believe that maybe some outside elements or whatever outside elements may be involved. None of the security, as Kalanji brought up earlier, was injured. So people are also pointing to all these rumors of inside outside game. I know you don't know everything that's happening, of course,
Yeah.
because it just happened. But can
Yes.
you give us a quick update on what you know and
Sure,
what the
sure.
situation is like on the ground?
All right. Well, first, thank you for having me again. And I think you've summed up a lot of the news that is at this point clear that the president is dead, and so is his wife. Um,
Oh, she did
You
pass.
did pass.
yeah, I've gotten news just, of
Okay.
course, let's wait to confirm officially. But I received news that she had been injured, gravely injured, and then they just updated that she's died.
Mm.
So, of course, it's a tricky place to be in. This is a president who never really had a popular mandate to even be a president, and whose term should have ended this year, right? So it's a very complicated place to be in, right? Since he was not exactly loved by the people and being protested everywhere, particularly the last referendum that he was pushing towards the production of a new constitution that would do a number of things, which is to allow non-Haitian nationals, right, even if they're of Haitian descent, right, who have other citizenship, so in the United States or Canada, to potentially hold the highest office of the country. So, if we're talking about self-determination, this is a huge contradiction, right? That others in other places can determine what happens within the border of Haiti. But some of the things that this constitution would allow, and there actually was recently a sort of pardon that was released, saying that any prime minister or official that had ever been involved or named, right, would essentially get immunity. So from 1991 up until 2018, that any president or prime minister or high official that had any kind of issues with the audit court would be officially, like, all investigations would be waived, right? And this is particularly important in thinking about Laurent Lamotte, who was the prime minister under Martelly, the first president of this party after the earthquake, who's put out a book. I forgot the title of the book, where he's claiming to be the longest living prime minister and has reconstructed Haiti in 932 days, right? Who's already positioning himself for the presidency and who is really close to this particular president, right? So there's a lot of players who are vying for power who could be behind this coup. Even the communique, so the press release that the prime minister, who was about to be removed and replaced, that particular prime minister who said the whole thing about, oh, there was Spanish being spoken during this attack, is someone else that folks also view as a potential person we might be able to identify as benefiting from this assassination, in addition to some members of the oligarchy who are also members of the political opposition, Reginald Boulos to name one, who just last week there was a arrest. What's the word I'm looking for here? So it happens when I'm in a different country. There was an arrest warrant, that's the word, out for him in relation to money that he had borrowed from the state and had not spent doing anything that he was supposed to have done, right? So this is one of the first or the second oligarchs that this president came after. The other one, it's connected to electricity production in the country, right? So that points to me to a faction within the oligarchy, right? And some who were aligned with them and others who were not, right? And so we know that the oligarchy essentially control the ports in Haiti, control the food that people get to consume or not. So they're certainly responsible with obviously the gun suppliers, in this case, the United States, right, for the fuckery that we're living here in Haiti, right? They control the space. So it's very hard to say who could have done it in terms of the actors within the borders of the country. And certainly, I think that it will come out that there was some international involvement for sure. For example, the referendum was reported at the beginning of June. The government of Haiti said, okay, we're reporting this, for X time. But the Biden administration had written the next day saying it's annulled, right? So it's possible too that the puppet was deciding to do his own thing, and that could have come to upset the powers that be. I think it's a very complicated picture, but what I will tell you is that if you turn on the radio right now, people are playing music. And this is something that was shocking to me as well. Even during, I had talked to Kamau about coming on to talk about, what I call the 5-day massacre in Martissan. Even during that time, the radio waves, were giving music and just commercials as if it was another day, when in reality on the ground, right, the president has been assassinated and the city's shut down. The prime minister is claiming that he has control over the territory. Bullshit, right? But he's saying, we have everything under control. He's been on the radio since like 5 o'clock in the morning, talking about how the army is gonna, bring things under control.
Dr. Prosper, I'm sorry, but when we see some of the news footage that has been floating around online, coming from Dominican Republic news sources, and when we hear, it's all good. It's all good.
Everybody stop.
Yeah, we work with Kamau. We're used to that. I'm surprised there's not 10 kids falling through the shot as we speak. But when we see news from the DR, when we hear that some of the members of the attacking force or squad were speaking Spanish, to what extent is it common in Haiti for the DR to be involved, whether as a body of news reporting, or police and militia or army or more? To what extent is that or not common?
I think, it's funny, I think people are suspecting that the Spanish speaking is coming from Colombian forces. I think that's, again, this is all speculation, right? Sure. Part of it has to do with the fact that the Colombian, anti-kidnapping forces had come to do a training with the Haitian police a couple months back, right? So there are more than just sort of the Dominicans who are interested in what happens within Haiti. Obviously, they share a border. They benefit from us as a market to buy, I'll say they're cheap, pesticide-filled foods. But of course, you also have what is, I think I mentioned this before, a bomb-ass Black Dominican resistance that stands up for Haiti every time. And the Dominicans, they do have relationships militarily, especially in terms of border control with the Haitian police. The current president, Abinader, I would say it was some sort of ally to Jovenel Moïse, right? They had several meetings talking about how to beef up border security. So I don't really perceive that they had a stake in it specifically. But again, Moïse holds a lot of secrets of all kinds of people who benefited from the Petro-Caribe embezzlement, right? Including some Dominican funds who had been, Dominican companies who had been given contracts to build roads that, they spent 10 years building, right? And then a new company had to come in to finish the job. And there are, already evidence that there is one Dominican senator who gave money to the campaign of the first president of this party. So the ties are certainly there, and they're certainly, I would say they're close, right? But I don't know if we can comfortably say that it was the Dominicans or
no. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Not that that we would obviously ask you to, or any of us to come to a conclusion, but I was just wondering, because when we see that, is it in other words, is it routine for Dominican news to cover events in Haiti, for instance? Is it routine that you would see Spanish-speaking militia or police from either the DR or elsewhere operating in Haiti, or is this something you think is when we see these clips, is this out of the ordinary in any?
No, I think that the Dominican media, according to my comrades, the radicals are, much like we complain about anywhere, right, owned by the dominant groups, right, the fascists, the white supremacists. So they have all kinds of stakes in terms of, right, reporting the news in Haiti and specific kinds of news. There was a whole debate recently about the Massacre River and whether the river belonged to Haiti or to the DR. And, activists saw that as a big sort of smokescreen, right? Like, let's fan Haitian-Dominican tensions so people can stop paying attention to the fuckery that's happening on the ground, right? Distractions. So there are tensions, but, and I think the Dominican media has every reason to want to report on, chaos in Haiti. They do participate in, right, some amount of stabilization missions, but particularly in the border. I wouldn't say that they've played the same role as the Brazilian troops or the Chilean troops, like within the 17-year occupation of Haiti, right, where they were much more evident, right, on the ground, because the folks wear their flags on their sides, right? It may be because people know that the Dominican troops on Haitian soil might be politically too charged. I mean, not that Brazilians on Haitian soil is not a charge issue, but I think they know how to play these optics, right?
Sure.
In terms of who's given what role to dominate in what way. But that Haiti is really up for grabs by multiple powers in the world in the end.
So speaking of that, now that this even before this assassination, there were a lot of rumors or talk that the United Nations might be invited back into Haiti to quell all the violence or destabilization and so forth. And I know, again, this is early. We don't know what the next steps are. But do you think that with this sort of brazen assassination that's happened, like what the powers will be, will be their next step? This is go towards now a larger call by particularly the elites to have international troops back in Haiti to quell whoever they may blame it on, who may not be the real parties, to be honest. So,
right. There have been different parties, different groups of people. Like, I don't want to use parties to confuse, what I mean, but different groups of people who are interested in a new mission in Haiti and have said as much. The groups are varied, including, right, people who are close to the government, people in the opposition, diaspora folks in the United States, right? People have already been pushing for this idea that there's too much chaos here and that we need some sort of, right, big brother intervention. And without those same people naming the reality is that Haiti doesn't produce guns. So if we have this undeclared war happening, we're actually calling the same people who created the problem to come fix it, right? The United Nations were here for 17 years. Right? But during the 17 years, we have more guns on the territory than we did before. So how did they come to be here in such great numbers that the gangs can be more well armed than the Haitian police force and somehow say that it's going to be a return of this mission that's going to fix the problem that only exists because they were here in the first place? And of course, the discourse is going to be limited to Haiti's chaos, right? We know how anti-Blackness works, right? To portray Black people as unruly and savage and just rioting and burning shit, for no reason, apparently. And, the anti-Haitianism that's specific to, right, the punishing for the first Black Republic even existing. I think that those two things make that, make it that no one's going to turn and see how the United States has played an instrumental role in this chaos. And instead, the US is going to be given the role of, right, fixing it, right? And even our good radicals will, like, jump on this and think it's a great idea, right? So, I would like to think that it's not going to happen, but it just seems like what happened today will just give that much more strength to the argument that Haiti needs, another occupation. Like, who will lead it? That will tell us also about some geopolitical shifts happening, right? That it might not be Brazil, but I don't know, maybe it'd be Colombia, right? There are ways, and I've been pushing this with Kamau and talking about how those of us in the US need to gain a broader view of how US empire moves, right? And the sub-imperialists, right, that exist in all over the world, and in particular in the Americas, who are vying for power, right? And who look for these kinds of opportunities to position themselves. So again, that it will tell us a lot, right? Who decides that they want to be at the head of some next mission. But the Haitian diasporic folks, my counterparts, who are not radicals in the US, are also fucking shit up, because they're vying for power and control as well, and they are the ones who have already asked for a UN mission in Haiti, and a transition government that would come to include those of us who don't live in the country to decide what happens. So there are a lot of parties, a lot of groups that could benefit from an occupation. And there was already a momentum shift this year against Jovenel Moïse, where even those who are pro his program, right, because those who will take over power aren't going to all of a sudden become revolutionary, right, popular governments. They're going to continue the same plan for Haiti, which is to cut it up in little pieces and sell it to all the multinationals and make the Haitians into, right, laborers. That's the plan. That's the model, right? And so the new groups that come aren't going to all of a sudden be ready for, a decolonization, process and a revolution here. They're just looking to get theirs. That's basically what it is, right? All these folks who are positioning themselves. So we're not, unfortunately, in a revolutionary moment, even if there are folks in the States who claim to be radicals going around saying that, the federated gangs are actually revolutionary armies of the people. That's not how the people of Haiti are living, right? This so-called revolutionary army that claims that it's fighting, right, for the masses, but yet only ever attacks the masses. So, I just wanted to drop that there, because I think that's another part of the confusion, is wanting to glorify the gangs as some sort of people's army, that I think is very dangerous, that some of our so-called radicals are, maybe they're not of African descent, but, they're radicals going around claiming that these are revolutionary people's forces. And,
So could we take that moment then to just to get from your perspective some clarity on what the revolutionary perspective, or what revolutionary perspectives are saying should happen? And then I just wanted to make sure I heard correctly, if we could just quickly, when you said these radio stations are continuing to play music, are you suggesting this is more of the state's attempt to show calm and we're still all good, or is this in any way meant to celebrate the assassination? Like, you're not saying that, right? People are, or are people celebratory? I don't.
I think everybody's fucking confused,
right?
To even know, are we celebrating, or are we mourning? I mean, I don't think a lot of us are going to mourn, but I don't know that those same people will celebrate necessarily, because it just feels that much more confusing, right? And that there are many, many other players, that some of them we don't even realize, right, who are making decisions for us, right? Or I would say for them who live here, right? I'm here in Haiti, so I'm an us today, right? But as far as the radio, I mean, of course, most of the radio is owned by the elites and, the government. So we could say that it is an attempt to show that everything is just as it was yesterday. But I think also it's a sign of, right, just how much I would say death has become too normalized in this place, right? That would be my interpretation. I was just sharing with a comrade that the day that there was the massacre in one part of the town, and that, the hotel by my house was blasting music, right? It's that folks, there are different reactions, right, to what's happening and to the country being under siege. And I think that this nihilistic, like, we're going to party as things burn, is also another kind of response that folks are having. But I mean, as far as the radio, everyone's writing frustrated. Like, we're looking for the news and we can't find the news. Like, what the fuck is going on? If I didn't have WhatsApp and people were communicating unofficially, which is also terrible because that means a lot of fake news is going around as well. We're not hearing the news from the media. We didn't also hear on the news about what was happening, the massacres, right? It was very brief news on very certain specific channels. So that has been the trend, that the government or the dominant media just don't talk about what's actually happening, right? The massacre that happened last week, that folks are planning a march for this Sunday as a response. The march is, let's say, temporarily canceled, right? Because folks are like, what just happened here has just changed the game, and we need to take a beat to figure out if a march on Sunday even makes sense, right? And what I was saying is, when the thing was, when the massacre was happening, the government, the president, who's always tweeting about anything, right, that makes his government appear like it's actually working, didn't say a word. Not a word on Matisan, with more than 10,000 people displaced and people living in a gym, like on top of each other. And we're talking about COVID, social distancing, right? Like, that's not happening. And this recent massacre that included 22 people, not a word, as if it hadn't happened, right? So it's strange, but I think what you're saying is that the idea of showing that there's calm and normalcy may be the objective.
Jared had asked about sort of the revolutionary perspective, and so I wanted to get back to that, but throw in there. So obviously there were some upcoming elections which were supposed to happen, relatively speaking, soon. And so how would you what do you think is going to happen with that, as well as, and again, you just mentioned that a demonstration that I'm going to assume was called by more left forces, quote unquote progressive forces, that's going to be postponed. But what is your assumption about regrouping by the left, and sort of what next in this sort of turmoil that's happening currently?
What a question, Kamal. What a question. I don't know today that I can fully answer that, other than to say what remains true is that there was really never really a government in Haiti, right? There were people who occupied positions in the state and who were allowed to decide for us, right? And on behalf of us. And today there's still no government. It's a great opportunity for people to potentially take to the streets and sway the direction of what could come. Unfortunately, I think there isn't necessarily an already ready group to assume control without really an armed wing, right? I think one of the things about our progressives, and I think this is true of us also in the States, I know some individuals may carry guns for self-defense, but it's not part of the nonviolent script that we have been given, right, in terms of how we do this next revolution. So the progressive wing doesn't have an official armed wing to help prop its power. The police, the armed police groups didn't take on, right, the role of being a people's army. The gangs are also potentially, some of them, I don't know which one right now I could possibly name, right, could be convinced to really actually turn into a people's program. But right now, I can't really make any definite pronouncements. I do think that what people were asking for, a transition government, is going to happen. It's just not going to look like what the progressives wanted, because there's a crisis, and there are people who've taken over, right, giving directions for what the next steps are. And I think a lot of those people are actually presently in the States, including other diasporic folks like myself, and that they may be able to take control of what the transition looks like, particularly if there's an intervention. It's going to be taken away out of the hands of the progressives here in Haiti. And I think it's because we don't have a people's army for real that could back up, the nonviolent stuff that we do. So
Just quickly, forgive me if I missed any of this, but what the daily, like so far at least, the days operate, the business of the day, is it, are shops open, grocery stores open to the right now, like are things?
No.
So everything is shut. The country's shut down.
Well,
They're just
not
playing
the
music on
country.
the radio with no news, but everything else is shut down. Right.
The capital.
Capital. Okay.
Yeah. The other cities, people are going about their regular business, and it's relatively true also in terms of gang activity. Most of it is concentrated around Port-au-Prince, so coming in and out. That's where you'll find most of the gangs. I think at some point they had said there were 117 gangs, 95 of which are in Port-au-Prince area alone. So this Port-au-Prince is like a specific reality. That's also where the White House is, right? And where all the state agencies are and where the president lives. So that's where the real, clashes take place. It doesn't mean there's not resistance other places. But this is a particular, political. I've been speaking Creole so long. I'm like, where's all my English at? I'm like, the word is here, right? But it's a specific political place, right? Being that all the symbols of power are here. That's very different than if you protest in Jérémy, Jacmel. Gonaïve, I think, has a little bit more of a symbolic importance, being the city of independence. But the other places, when the protests happen, it's important, obviously, right? And it shows that there's dissent everywhere. And I spent some time earlier in June going around the country, particularly the north. There's nowhere you went where people weren't saying down with Jovenel Moïse. It was clear that this is somebody no one wants, and he's no one's president, right? So the loss of him is also, nobody wanted him around anyway, right? It's just, I think what makes people skittish is that we don't know what happened.
Right.
And it points further to the fact that, I always say this, all the time when we're talking about Haiti sovereign, it's like, Haiti sovereign where? Like, what you talking about? Like, right? And maybe this makes it even more obvious. This is the first president to be killed in power since early 20th century Haiti. Mm-hmm. And that happened right before the US was going to occupy Haiti. Right? So this is even Aristide, who was so loathed, like he didn't get killed. Like he got to leave, right? Like relatively unscathed. So this is pretty big for us, even if it's a president nobody likes, right? And the fact that it could be done, either it's an inside job or an outside one, but speaks to the fact that, who's really controlling the space, right? Is not the people who are living inside of its borders.
Well, Dr. Prosper, just for my 2 cents, thank you very much for jumping on quickly this morning.
Yes.
And
I told him, I was like, it's too soon. Like everybody wants comments, and it's like we're still trying to figure out what the fuck happened.
Well, I mean, we're happy to have you back as many times.
Yes. And I was supposed to come on and talk about the march, and boom.
In fact, when I first asked you this morning, my own ignorance, I had not even read the news, to be honest, about the assassination. So I was actually thinking that, for the rally, since we were just talking about covering it live on BPM over the weekend. And then a few seconds later, it just popped up that he was assassinated. And I know we want to let you go, and we're gonna move on soon. And again, I know we've alluded to the fact that some of this is speculation. We don't have a lot of answers. But a couple of quick things, so we know that this president this was not well liked. We understand that this president but also had allies, and still it seemed like was an ally with the U.S. government. But from the outside, and maybe I'm going to speculate, not ask you, and you can comment on my speculation as I go down this road. It seems like that he may have outlived his usefulness in terms of his relationship with the United States. I don't necessarily buy that this type of assassination can happen without a wink and or a nod from certain forces that he is allied with, particularly the way the assassination took place, which was in his residence. which means getting by guards and security, and coming in at such an hour where he would have been in bed, which also means knowing a certain layout in order to get to him. So it seems, it almost seems like, again, to speculate, that there are larger forces at play, even if we don't know what those forces are, because it seems too well planned an assassination to suggest that it was just done by quote unquote unruly gangs or simply rival factions without. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Now, I don't even think people are speculating that the gangs had anything to do with it, right? Even with the recent federation turning against him and saying, like last month they were like, yes, Jovenel's got to stay, the referendum's got to pass, the Constitution has to pass. A month later, they're talking about we're revolutionaries and we're anti, Jovenel and the oligarchy. We're gonna attack the oligarchy. They didn't attack no oligarchy, but Jovenel, by issuing this warrant against what a member of the opposition, but also a member of the bourgeoisie, that's also a big move, right? So I think there are many people who were upset at him, and that, he also could reveal all the folks who are tied, I think, internationally with the Petro-Caribe scandal. It's not just state officials of Haiti. There are several international companies who essentially ran away with the money and didn't do the work they were supposed to do. And I think that he comes to be able to reveal all of that. There's the journalist who was assassinated last week. Some people speculate that she had information that was too sensitive, that she was, they were going to take her out, so she doesn't have a chance to spill it. So that could also be part of it, that he stopped being useful, or he became more threatening to those whose dirty secrets he could reveal. And I agree with you, it has to be an inside job. He has security, the best trained people, in the country to protect his house. And apparently they were all tied up. And, most of them didn't die, right? I think someone was injured, but they got all tied up and they all made it. But the president and his wife are dead. So, and the prime minister, who was about to get booted, got on the radio like 2 hours later talking about everything's under control and putting out communiques saying, oh, there were Spanish-speaking people who were here. That seems convenient, so there's a lot of players who could benefit from this. But one thing is true, there hasn't been a sitting president, though he's de facto and never had a popular mandate, but there's never been a sitting president to be assassinated like this for 110 years in this country. So this is pretty significant.
Wow.
You mentioned that a reporter was killed last week, and I don't think, again, outside of Haiti, people have heard about that killing. Can you just briefly, again, touch on that killing and what it is that people were, what some of the ideas are around what she may or may not be revealing that led to the assassination?
Well, in general, there were two journalists who were murdered, and it was, again, right in front of the home of the female journalist. She's, journalists, I guess, are supposed to be impartial, but, that's not true, right? They report the news in a particular perspective. And she, in particular, had been very vocal on the radio and on television, denouncing this current party in power. Right. So, she had already received death threats. They had already made attempts on her life. So this is not new, but they were succeeded this time. I mean, what kind of information particularly, I'm not sure, other than she's an extremely visible figure. Right. And so the march people were actually planning, we're going to denounce the general violence in the country, but lift up this particular person. And I think some of the reasons why she's being lifted up is because she's a journalist, she's been pretty vocal, she's pretty visible, but she's also a member of the middle class, right? And folks, if you're used to people in La Saline disappearing off the face of the map, and 70 people disappearing and they're nameless because they live in those places considered, lesser than, I think the fact that this is a middle class person, right, who has a professional status that could be taken out by what we perceive is, right, a government-backed situation, it really tells you, right, that the dictatorship is now fully touching everyone, right? It's not a specific class of people who are targeted because they're known to be more militant, right? And it's not a specific group of people who are under siege by the gangs, right? But now this is true of all the folks who are resisting, who may occupy, more positions, of privilege. I think that's part of why that was a particular blow for folks. And because she is part of a lot of different organizations as well that are militant, that have been putting out statements and denouncing. So I think that that's part of why she's been lifted, right? I think some folks are like, why is she being lifted? And like 70 people died in La Saline and we didn't know one of their names. And I think that critique is absolutely true. But I think it's also because she is somebody who, as an individual, was very visible and known, that this feels like a much more organized, targeted assassination. Though the chief of police, who was personally named by now, the president who's been assassinated, he claimed that this murder was done by the armed police group. And this is after no investigation was done. Even the human rights groups were like, that's kind of irresponsible for you just to say you think that's who did it without an investigation. But that's because they're trying to sully, right, the name of this armed police group, right, to sort of put them together in the same lot as the gangs. And all that does is create more confusion for the population, right? You don't know who's killing who anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And it becomes harder for you to point that the state has anything to do with it or the oligarchy, because it seems like people are coming at you from all directions, right? I think this is what today shows too, more confusion, so that we can't identify who's really behind, right, the demise of Haiti, though we suspect we already know.
Yeah. So there's in our chat, I think one sort of wrap up question potentially. Folks are saying what it is that, or asking the question in sort of what should outside supporters of Haitian should do, Haiti on the ground, particularly by left forces. Obviously, people are saying make sure that we don't call for any UN/US intervention. What in your opinion is the role right now of the larger left, Black activists, other organizers, other folks who are radical, during this time to help support the people on the ground and to help support, even if we don't have a people's army, the people's movement in Haiti during a time like this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I definitely think sometimes when these events happen, we sort of turn to it and how do we bring an immediate solution. And I want to push us to keep thinking about the longer term, right? Even the comment about the radios that are controlled by the oligarchy, by the government, right? Who choose to play or not play the news for a variety of strategic reasons to control the information. One of the things the leftists in general are realizing is important, not only because we know the results that it gave to push out the Duvalier dictatorship, and the response that came after was to recuperate all the radio stations, right? And even I think I shared this with you, Kamal, even in the struggles that are happening up north around this free trade zone, one of the first things that this oligarch did was to control all the radio stations. So only one kind of message is coming through. So I think if there's something long-term, not just let's respond to this crisis and write, statements, which are also very important, right? To say we don't want more occupation. That doesn't fix anything. It brought us here. Certainly we want people to be able to hold that line. But at the same time, I think the longer term is how do we build the alternative here in this place, so that when there is an opportunity like this, right, the progressives, the radicals are ready, because the power, the base has been built. And I think the radio and putting in place an alternative radio station in this country that would have a host of shows like the ones we have on BPM, would be something useful for the movement in the long run. And I say this not because I don't think it's important to do the online stuff. It's just that with lack of electricity and non-reliable data, we have to go to, sort of the analog stuff, right? The actual radio that can then produce a link that you could still share, right, on social media. But that's my plug, like, let's not let the current thing make us not remember that there's a longer struggle, and that's the one that we have to help build, and not simply like putting out little fires, which are also important. I don't know if that's clear what I'm hinting at.
It's very clear to me, and I was in fact going to thank you for providing BPM with its initial statement on the assassination of Moise. I think this interview is a good initial statement for us, and we certainly look forward to helping support your work and others who want to keep us appropriately focused. So, thanks.
And
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and as you go out, can you name the coalition that you've been working with? If there's a website for people to go to find out more information about the coalition and so forth, and then we'll let you go.
Yes, so there's the Coalition Community Movement Builders is a founding member of, participant. We actually have someone after I came on the show and was like, I need help on the website, who's helping us get it up and sexy for all of our millennials and Gen Zs who need to see that, to know that their work is really being done.
It's the only real evidence, clearly.
It's the only real evidence. So it's levecampé.org. And, we're always looking for more folks to plug in. It is an international coalition, and part of that, it makes the work heavy because we move in 3 languages, but part of it is to decenter, right, the US, and to understand that empire led by the US, right, includes other players that we need to take seriously, and therefore organizing these territories as well. And then frankly, those of us who claim to be anti-imperialists, anti-capitalists, like, we're not going to win this struggle by talking to just ourselves and by organizing with just ourselves in the US. I know that's already a big thing to try to do, but right, that the fight is ultimately international, and that we have to be in those spaces as well, right? Having multiple conversations and organizing multiply. So the coalition has insisted to stay international. And I think I've mentioned this before, we have learned in doing that the Dominicans are ready to fight, and to fight to defend Haiti, which for me has been the best part of being in this coalition. I was like, yes, to the Dominicans, like, yes. So like, and now like nobody can badmouth a Dominican again in front of me. Like, that's it, right? But yeah, so I think that, the efforts that we do in the coalition is mostly, right, like putting pressure and protesting, right? And putting out statements. Like, it's a pressure space. It's not, gonna go testify in Congress and do those other things. I think we leave that for the liberals to do. That's the type of fight I think is important. I'm not trying to do it, but this coalition is interested in putting pressure and showing, right, the full picture of empire and how it moves, right, through the OAS, Organization of American States, through the United Nations, right? Even if we know obviously all of that is just the US manipulating, but we can't undermine the power interests of other territories and countries in this world, right? And that's part of what the coalition wants to continue to hold up. I'll stop there.
Right on. Thank you.
So on that note, thank you for coming on. This has been the Remix Morning Show. We're a little over, but obviously we thought this was so much more important than to go over and not end with our usual way. So we want to thank you, Dr. Prosper. Stay safe. And we will see folks tomorrow on the Remix Morning Show.